OWASP is a nonprofit that stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. DevSecOps is only one of many projects with OWASP. OWASP is a community of developers, technologists, and evangelists improving the security of software through tools and resources. OWASP has 100 plus active projects, and new project applications are submitted weekly. Projects are open source and are built by our community of volunteers, people just like you. Community and networking. There are hundreds of local chapters worldwide and thousands of members. Meetings are free and open to everyone. They include training, talks, and networking opportunities. Education and training. OWASP hosts many events each year. They are a great way to improve your skills, build your professional network, and learn about new trends in the industry. One of the many ways you can get involved is to become a member. The membership benefits include discounts for events and trainings, your own OWASP email address and Google Workplace access, a vote in our OWASP Global Board elections, and recently, OWASP added a brand new member benefit, access to hands-on application security training through the OWASP Secure Flag Open Platform. Join us and become a member today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the OWASP DevSecOps show. Today's episode is the dark side of DevSecOps with Yasmin Taylor. But before we introduce Yasmin, I want to introduce you to my co-host, Shanisa Cambrick. Shanisa? Oh.
So I get the pleasure of introducing Yasmin Taylor, who will lead us on an informal chat on the rise of DevOps and give us a discussion around security measures. So Yasmin's worked in the IT project management and service management field and has a passion for encouraging young women to pursue roles within the STEM field. She enjoys sharing her experience as a woman of color navigating the tech world. And her main area of expertise is AI, robotics, and engineering. Over to you, Yasmin.
Good afternoon. Well, where I am, it's afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for giving me time to come on the show today to talk about the dark side of DevOps, which probably sounds very intriguing. I'll probably just introduce myself again. So thank you for that introduction. As you can see, my name is Yasmin Taylor. I actually started my tech journey in 2011, and I originally studied artificial intelligence and robotics. So the plan was to kind of go more to the structural engineering side. But I guess most people, when you do study AI, you fall in love with the concept of automation. So as my career progressed, I just went along with automation. I would say that I've been working indirectly with DevOps for about 5 years now. And the reason why I say that is because DevOps right now is more so of a culture that we should adhere to, not necessarily something that has to be embedded. It definitely has to be fitted to every organization that you are currently working in. That's just kind of a bit about me. On the side, I'm a big advocate for getting women in tech, especially in DevOps. As you can see, the DevOps market is very overly saturated by white male individuals, if we're totally being honest with you. So my main goal is just to encourage other people from ethnic minorities, not just to get into DevOps, but tech on a whole. I was really excited about coming on the show today just to talk about DevSecOps and why I call it the dark side. I think in many ways, automation can be great, but as we go on the show, I'll definitely explain my opinions on that, and let's get started.
Great. Let's do it.
So I'll go ahead and start then. So what I'm going to do is, I think, I've gone on and I've said DevOps, or we've said DevOps so many times, but the main thing is, what is DevOps? Kind of going back to what I said. So I feel like DevOps more so is a culture, not necessarily a technical framework that you have to adhere to. From my knowledge, I've been working in DevOps indirectly for about 5 years. But as of recently, I always say in 2018/19, I literally just woke up one day and I just fell into DevOps. My manager was just like, oh, hey, you guys are cloud DevOps engineers. And you're like, what? And then all of a sudden it was kind of like, you've gone from being an infrastructure engineer to a DevOps engineer. And now you've got like a team of about 20 people cloud engineers, platform engineers, but ideally we all work within the same DevOps framework. Hence why I said it's more so of a culture. When thinking of DevOps, and especially working for organizations, I like to think of myself as as a consultant. Not only, is DevOps the practices of technically being able to implement something, but it's also embedding a culture that has been modeled around the current organization or environment that you're in. And that kind of leads me to being in the mindset of saying DevOps is a culture, but what is the kind of culture that we would like to promote? And one of the two main things that I like to promote within working in organizations and kind of integrating DevOps is making sure that it's cost effective, automated, and time efficient. I think, regardless of whether you're working in DevOps or not, that is the backbone of any tech organization. Can it save us money? Can it be time efficient? And most importantly, can it be cost effective? And, that's the beauty of DevOps, because ideally, the concept of DevOps embodies those whole things. So when we think of DevOps, we think of cloud providers. And you've got, AWS Cloud, you've got Oracle Cloud, you've got, I think, Alibaba, you've got Azure as well. The three main ones I would say that I predominantly working or have seen on the market, it would be all four: GCP, AWS, Azure, GCP, AWS, and Azure. Yeah, that's three currently on the market. And one of the biggest questions I'm asked whenever kind of designing an architecture diagram is it cost effective? I actually wrote a Medium article called Battle in the Sky. So bit about me, I'm really into like sci-fi movies and stuff, so it kind of makes sense why I kind of followed into studying AI in uni. And I just basically wrote a Medium article called Battle in the Sky, and it basically was looking at the different offerings that different cloud providers could host. And to be quite frank with you, all of them basically offer the same thing. It really just depends on your organization. If you are coming from a Microsoft background, or you kind of host your servers, or the current organization you have using Microsoft and you are a Microsoft Gold partner, then in many ways it would make sense to go towards Azure, especially if most of your databases or most of your contacts or organizational units are stored in Active Directory. Microsoft Azure AAD or Active Directory would be able to facilitate that. And in regards to saving time and cost, you'll probably be able to get a good deal on that. And the migration time is much more less because you're already on that platform. AWS now, I notice, is a bit more efficient in regards to bigger organizations, and especially working in a bigger organization, working in different regions. AWS has a great multi-region kind of tooling that you could use. And then there's GCP, which is fantastic in regards to security because it's really compliant with GDPR and ISO 27001 practices. But essentially, they all do the same thing. The biggest thing that most companies really need to consider is what can save me the most money. And that's how you kind of model the concept of DevOps and using cloud providers in accordance to your kind of organization. Right. So in regards to processes, so DevOps is a culture, but there's many processes involved. Before I kind of was deep into tech, aka technical engineering, I was also a service manager, or service delivery manager. And that's basically adhering to an ITIL model. And then I went on to project management, which could be coincided, and that's using Prince 2. The funny thing about DevOps is that it's just basically putting yourself in the mindset of a consultant, but just being very technical with it as well. And I actually found out that using the concept of ITIL in regards to processes, and at times Prince 2, was very easy to kind of coincide with the DevOps world. And this is how we kind of get into tooling. So whilst being a service delivery manager, yeah, sure.
Yasmin, real quick, can you just go into what ITIL is for those that might not be familiar with ITIL?
Yeah, sure. So ITIL is a service management framework that is used, especially in regards to kind of like working in project management or anything to do with service desking. So it allows you to kind of follow a procedure in regards to incident management and prioritize them from a P1 incident, which is like major service crashed, everything's on fire, to P5, a coffee spilled on a laptop keyboard, we can do that later. So essentially it's a set of processes or service management processes that allow the lower level of kind of like, I would say, IT to kind of keep in check.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point because a lot of that does inform, or if you understand what ITIL is, it can help understand that migration into DevOps. Because there's a lot of sort of overlap, and not overlap, but like common themes is really a better description.
Yeah, I would say like ITIL is kind of like Java, and then DevOps is like Python. Like it's just a bit more fancy and automated. But I think for a lot of people that I know in senior positions that are working within DevOps world, we all kind of came from ITIL. So coming from such a background that was service delivery, client facing, vendor specialist, and process driven, it was very easy for me to over to DevOps, especially being quite technical as well, because you're essentially still working in processes. And it's funny how you also mentioned that, because a lot of the processes that we use when working within the DevOps culture is actually also used when you're kind of in the service management. And that kind of just goes on to the best tooling to use. So CI/CD practices. So that's continuous integration and continuous deployment. Yet again, that's going towards a set of processes. Things like Jenkins is something that I use on Octopus. So Octopus is a tool that is used to encourage automation with deployment. And Jenkins is also a tool that is used to kind of encourage continuous improvement, continuous deployment, CI/CD, if you kind of want to make it fancy. But all of these toolings also work along other great toolings such as ServiceNow, Jira, or Confluence. So what I was mostly surprised of when it kind of being integrated in the DevOps world is how much processes that we still would have to do, even though we encourage automation. So for instance, if you are having a deployment and you kind of want to do sprint, you would use Jira to do that, but maybe Jenkins on the back end to kind of help you deploy that. You still have to have the annoying 9 a.m. to 9:30 backlog meeting or the retro meetings. I'm a bit of a process freak, which is, I guess, quite good. So I also use Confluence to kind of putting, I don't know, Terraform scripting to kind of just send off and automate, or kind of like step-by-step guides. Then it leads on to Terraform. So Terraform is, I would say, somewhat a newish language, but it's like something that everybody uses, most likely working in DevOps. Or you can kind of just be a bit weird and use CloudFormation. I won't go on that, but hey, I used to use CloudFormation, but then I kind of went onto the bright side and kind of switched on to Terraform. But essentially, they're just toolings that could basically talk to your DevOps environment and can automate stuff. So one thing I do like about Terraform is that it kind of bridges the gap between different cloud providers, and it can also be used alongside other levels of platforms. So I was working on a project where I had to use a Microsoft Active Directory, Azure based, and then use AWS as a single sign-on via identity access management. And that was just done by a few lines scripts in Terraform. And then it goes on to use the scripts in the different languages. Apart from Terraform, you can use Python. But the great thing about DevOps is that even though you can still be quite technical, hence why you notice that you get the DevOps people like myself that came from a service management platform and were like magical unicorns and were somehow able to be quite technical, or you get the people that are like software engineers and then they go into DevOps. And those people, they use Java, they use Python, they use a range of different languages. And then that's how we get onto, GitOps. So GitOps, yet again, is another just sexy word that has just been thrown into the DevOps family, which is essentially meaning that you just are using some sort of repository. Repositories are something that is very important, especially in regards to going on to DevSecOps. And I would say that's because, there's been so many times I've been working with a junior member of staff, or I put my hands up and I've done it myself, and you accidentally push something to deployment, and then you're thinking, oh crap. Being in a GitOps model kind of negates away from making such mistakes, because you have a backlog of repositories that you can kind of click back and correct if necessary. And it also gives you a track of what changes have been made. And, stuff like this is really important when you are working in the DevOps world, because we are so focused on automation, things still have room for human error. And that kind of goes on to my next things. How do we incorporate security measures in DevOps with automation? Right.
Yeah, I guess as a question, I guess there's a lot of things that you have to consider, like what are you trying to secure and what is your objective in terms of security? So I guess I'd push that back with another question over. Yeah.
So, sorry.
I think the cool thing is that you can automate, right? That used to not be an option, right? So, before it was all manual, and now we have all these different ways of interacting with clouds or interacting programmatically with our repos and, our repositories. So we can automate. So I think then it becomes, what do you want to automate and what are you trying to solve for?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would piggyback on that. So there's the people aspect of culture. So Yasmin, you mentioned DevSecOps is a culture, but then there's that integration of people from different areas. And how does that build into what you do with your security and how you automate and what you automate?
Yeah. So I think, after like obviously being involved in this conversation, it's very clear that on a level, somehow security should be ingrained throughout the DevOps lifecycle. But I guess the main question is, it's not necessarily a question of should we ingrain security. I think that's somewhat of a no-brainer. It's somewhat, how do we accomplish this without affecting agility, speed, and other tenets kind of like correlated with DevOps? How do we tighten this and also balances everything else? And what I tend to kind of go into any organization or go into any other projects is probably sit down with the senior stakeholders and say, what should be our DevOps security best practices? And how we kind of start this, I kind of put my Prince 2 or project management hat on, and then we say, let's create an adherence to the organization that we're in, and let's somewhat embrace or create a DevSecOps model. Like the actual concept of DevOps, it has to be catered and adhered to every organization's. But I think the biggest issue with DevOps is because most people do not see it as a culture and they see it as something to kind of follow by the book. A lot of the times you will notice that your DevOps teams, so software engineering and security teams, are also somewhat misaligned. And this can kind of go on to creating a level of insecure code, hence why GitOps model is something to go along to, different level of vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and most importantly, the danger of like unsecured hardened code password. So we have to kind of make sure that we create something that allows us to have a tighter level of application security measures in case of any sort of easy targets or attackers. So, yeah.
No, I mean, to that point, in your experience, what are some easy wins to accomplish first? And if you're going to try to, if you're meeting with senior stakeholders, you say, okay, how do we prioritize all the things we need to prioritize? Speed, scale, all the agility. So what are the easy security wins that you can kind of cook in the first iteration of migrating to a DevSecOps culture?
I would say first, my number one thing is kind of like policy and governance. Let's first of all kind of create some sort of a transparent cybersecurity policy or procedures that are just easy for other team members or developers to understand. Then I would say maybe automate the DevOps security processes and tools. So that would include code analysis, configuration management, vulnerability testing and management, security automation, using stuff like Octopus, and also looking at the efficiency of kind of like load balancers. And I think when you kind of follow those, it faces less resistance to embedding security practices. I would also say, apart from vulnerability management, configuration management, making sure that your current DevOps environment could be, it's not as easy for it to be kind of like copied, but it's easy for it to be fixed. So kind of using the offerings that AWS has in regards to scanning and identifying any sort of issues. And most importantly, which I would think is the best one, security or secret management. So like secret vaults and stuff. So SH keys, API tokens, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, they all are tools that are very easy and automated to use, but also require a higher level of security management. And these can kind of help going forward to integrate and can protect privilege, account, and credentials. And it's also very easy to manage. So you can implement that in part of your like secure management.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. Yeah, it's a lot of things to do, but yeah, no.
Another thing I would say is that I think the world of DevSecOps especially can be very overwhelming, and there are so many great toolings in the market. But I think what a lot of organizations, and what I found out, is it's not just about using the sexiest tool in the market. It's about using the tool in the market that fits your environment the most. So for instance, if you're using Ansible, they're most likely used with Helm charts, but do not use Helm if you do not need it and just kind of just waste money doing that. Chef and Puppet are stuff to use, but you also might find that within your, I don't know, Oracle Cloud, there may be something that offers the same as Chef or Puppet, but it's just not called that. And I think that's where a lot of kind of companies breach their security, or dare I say lose money, because they have so many different toolings that require so much levels of automation and integration that human error is more bound to use. Sometimes it does pay to kind of just stick to one kind of cloud provider, or no more than two if needed to be, and just kind of use the offerings kind of going from there. And I think, that leads me to something what I like to call not identity access management, but for maybe senior stakeholders or other kind of places where that have quite a lot of sensitive data, such as hedge funds and bank, is privileged access management. So it's kind of just making sure that you can kind of permit access to privileged accounts, so like the root or admins or different levels of multiple individuals, and make sure that when these individuals are online or whatever, you produce a clean, somewhat audit trail. And it's just to kind of bring in less privilege, kind of like access risk, and kind of like implement principles of like least privileges.
So Yasmin, touching on your ITIL background a little bit, how do you make sure that as technology changes, as compliance rules change, all those things get incorporated into your DevSecOps culture?
Yeah. So I think I like to kind of keep myself updated in the market. And one thing that I learned very quickly in my career before I, especially in regards to, I think everyone's had a point in their career where they've almost crashed and burned, is not feeling the need to use, like I said, every tooling or to use everything that's out there. So you kind of just have to look at the concept of what you are trying to do and adhere to that if needed be. So coming from an ITIL background, and then kind of, I didn't necessarily leave ITIL or Prince2 behind. I thought, hey, there's certain concepts of ITIL or Prince2 that can help me whilst I'm kind of working in DevOps. I think even now there's something called ML Ops. So instead of kind of like leaving to get an ML Ops role, I simply use what I learned in my master's in AI to incorporate it to my everyday role. So I would say when looking at, hence why the importance of looking at DevOps as an actual culture, it's about looking at other kind of processes that there is in IT and seeing if you can fit it into the model for your organization. So for instance, TOGAF, that could be something that doesn't necessarily could be used along DevOps because they're totally different, but don't be afraid to kind of like pick and choose things to kind of adhere it to your model.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And then just a follow-up question, with the team around you, how do you make sure that they're up to speed and aware of, policy changes and technology changes and those type of things, and, keeping everybody on the same page?
Oh gosh, I would say GitOps. So especially in regards to kind of like keeping on the same page, it would be probably people management or team management, in the sense of, doing your retro meetings, your backlogs meetings, your sprints, going over tickets in meetings and making sure that the amount of information is kind of put in the tickets, following up with third parties or vendors or clients if needed be. And also in regards to keeping on track, it would be kind of making sure that we all have access or have some sort of GitOps model. So if anybody pushes something to code or pushes something in the prod or UAT environment, there's kind of like a clean audit trail. So I would say that's kind of how I keep in touch with my team, just to make sure that everyone's on the same level.
Thanks.
And I guess in terms of skills, right, to move into a DevSecOps culture, how do you, like traditional infrastructure management skills, like what would you suggest somebody starting out, somebody wants to kind of scale up? Like you mentioned Python as like sort of, obviously you were joking around about, Python being the advanced ITIL, but, what like specific technical skills do you think are required here to sort of, build out automation or kind of move towards this new culture? Terraform is sort of it's just YAML and JSON, right? So
basically,
yeah.
I actually wrote a Medium article called "How to Be a Goddess of DevOps," essentially, or God, not to be sexist, whatever you want to say. And in that, I not only outlined my journey of how I got into tech, it's mostly how I outlined my journey of how to get into DevOps. And I would say tech in general can be quite intimidating. DevOps can be very confusing. But if you kind of follow my steps of seeing it as a culture and how you could adhere, you can kind of go into it from different routes. You can kind of go in it from a project management side and kind of become a DevOps consultant, or you can be a software engineer and kind of come into it. But either way, if you're talking about being in DevOps and kind of wanted to technically, obviously be able to facilitate and do the job, I would say, and this is what I've done, is just to create projects online, open up a GitHub account and just Google examples of kind of like DevOps projects and just try to replicate that. It may not be 100%, it may not be well, but if you are somebody wanting to get into the DevOps world and you have no experience with it so far, a lot of employers like to see the effort that you have kind of gone out of yourself in your spare time and done those projects. So for instance, tooling. So another side of DevOps that people are really keen to get into is platform engineering, or SRE, which is totally kind of different, but that's more so focused on observability and monitoring using tools such as Datadog, New Relic, Prometheus, and Grafana. You don't have to know how to use them, but it's just kind of keeping yourself up to date of having the ability to explain that basically in layman terms, and then maybe producing a small project. There's also a lot of apprenticeships and interns around. And I think it is easy to kind of get into DevOps when you learn how to code a language. So even if you are learning how to code Python, which is quite commonly used, do a couple of Python projects and you should be able to kind of like land your first role in DevOps.
Yeah, no, you're right. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of, all the skills, even I like to think about, like, if you're coming from a network administration background or system administration background, you automate Windows infrastructure with PowerShell, you're kind of doing DevOps there. I mean, it's a little bit different, but you kind of are, right? And so it's just kind of reusing those skills that you probably use in other areas. Like if you're going to administer a network and now you're going to just do it via Terraform and, AWS, it's the same sort of thing as logging into a console and building out a subnet. And, you're just sort of thinking of everything as like, how could I script this? How could I, make this reusable?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think what I do like about the DevOps culture, or kind of like using DevOps, if you want to kind of get in, just, think of the tooling that you need and think of what DevOps means to you. So for some people, DevOps could mean embracing continuous integration and deployment. So then you'd probably look at Jenkins and see, how to use that. It's definitely just using your imagination, but at the same time, learning the adequate language. So I would say if you want to get into DevOps, definitely kind of scratch up on your Python.
So we have a question in the chat about, is DevOps enabled by cloud technology? I think the answer in most part is yes, but Yasmin, do you want to talk about how cloud technology enables DevOps?
Yes, so cloud technology. So I'm going to take it back. I'm not that old, but I remember my first journey into ever hearing about the cloud. I was working for a company on behalf of basically Microsoft as a business continuity manager, which is basically a great name for saying a technical consultant. And I had to kind of convince people to move into the cloud. And this was about 2015, and people were like, the cloud, so servers are going to be in the sky. You're just like, no. So let me just basically explain this. No, the servers will not necessarily, be in the sky per se, but it will just be in a location. It doesn't have to be specified to your building or organization. So long gone are the days where you have to have your servers in a messy kind of like back room downstairs. So, in regards to, hello?
Yeah.
So, in regards to that, that's kind of like how I would kind of like describe going into serverless. So could you repeat the question again? I think I kind of lost it.
Yeah, so the question is DevOps enabled by cloud technology? And then I added on to that I would say yes, that it is, but if you can explain how.
Oh yeah, so of course, I would say DevOps is in relation to cloud technologies, because the concept of cloud networking or cloud computing or cloud working is to be anywhere, everywhere, efficiently. And knowing that the culture of DevOps, or the concept of DevOps, is to improve time efficiency, cost efficiency, and most importantly, automation, it was just very easy to marry up the concept of DevOps working in cloud. I think from what I knew of it, people that when we were migrating from servers and disk and tapes onto the cloud, we were still trying to fit in different processes in order to do that. So very much in my early days as the infrastructure engineer, we were using maybe trying to use Prince2 methodologies to kind of migrate into the cloud, or the concept of the migration to cloud. You had much more people working on it because you'll need your IT account manager, your service delivery manager, your infrastructure engineer, and your software engineer. But the beauty of DevOps and coinciding with the cloud tooling is the fact that you are basically having a DevOps engineer that has all those concepts in one person. So it's much more efficient, and I guess hence why we can say that the DevOps is basically 5 roles in one, which can be a bit off-putting for a lot of people.
Right. So there's one more question about how do you feel about using DevOps as a service as a stepping stone of introducing DevOps into a large corporation?
DevOps as a service. I mean, yet again, what is DevOps as a service? And it depends on, what you kind of like see as. So using DevOps as a service, as introducing DevOps into a large corporation, I know that quite a lot of MSPs, so managed service providers, were kind of offering a package of DevOps to kind of test it out in the beginning, and then with the idea to kind of like rolling it out. That's quite good. But then what you happen is that down the line, you end up kind of like wasting quite a lot of money, and most importantly, kind of confusing a lot of people. So I would say to counteract that, bring somebody, I don't know, like myself or some sort of cloud architect in, and just allow them to give you a demo of what DevOps can kind of provide, and then you can kind of mold that into what you believe your organization needs. You don't necessarily need to have all the offerings of, dare I say, AWS, but you can kind of pick up what you need for now and then kind of like go on from there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think that, I'm not 100% sure if I understand what DevOps as a service is or what that would actually look like in real life. But I think what you're describing as like being outcome driven, like what do you want to accomplish as an organization? Are you looking to move faster? Are you looking to automate manual processes that take a release from 10, to 2 hours, make it 2 hours to do an actual release. And then once you know the things you're trying to solve for, then you build that DevOps automation around it to kind of solve these specific problems. I think that's a really good stepping stone in, but I also don't really know if I know DevOps as a service.
I'm sorry, yes. I was just going to say, I think it could also be covering for, lack of experience or, understanding technology within your organization, and then just farming that out to, another company.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that's what we used to call MSPs. So essentially, managed service providers were a company that kind of just give lots of offerings. If you need your IT fix, you need your computer replaced, you need a service delivery manager, they all came under one umbrella. The beauty about DevOps is that you've got tooling to kind of come under that umbrella. So in essence, AWS is DevOps as a service, if that makes sense, because you pick out your servicing, all the offerings of what you need. I'll be very intrigued. I think it'll be a very good business idea, though, if somebody could package DevOps as a service and automate it and roll out. I'll be, how would you do that?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to integrate with a lot of different services, but I guess you probably could do it. I mean, you could also use all the AWS native tools like Code Builder, Code Pipeline, things like that. And then maybe at that point, you're getting more into the DevOps as a service in AWS. I
think the world of DevOps is really exciting. It can be quite overwhelming, because I think now there's something called MLOps, where, it's basically machine learning and DevOps. Well, now DevOps is going to automation, but, from the family of DevOps, you've got DevOps as, let's say, the daddy, and then you've got cloud engineering, and then you've got senior site reliability engineering, which focuses more on kind of observability, monitoring, kind of using the tooling to kind of making sure that the process is correct. And then you've got platform engineering, then you've got platform data engineering, all within the cloud, all within using services within the cloud. So there's so many different avenues that you could potentially go to, which I think is really great. I just hope people, if you do want to kind of get into the world of DevOps, don't feel overwhelmed, because we all use the same tools, just in different ways. It's just about where your personality and where you believe that your niche fits.
There is another question that I think we all know the answer to in the chat, but it is not mandatory to learn all well-known DevOps tools.
Yeah.
I think, it's probably an impossible task to do that anyway, and there's a lot of them out there. But I think, Yasmin, you made a really good point, like being able to understand what their intent is, like what does Prometheus do in layman's terms? You don't necessarily need to know how to implement Prometheus or, a whole Elk stack somewhere or Grafana, but just like be able to understand what it actually does do.
Yeah. That's a good one. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm kind of in the process of like being a like Prometheus queen, because I'm more on the kind of like cloud architect SRE side. And I would just say basically Prometheus to me is twins with Grafana. And I would say that it's one of the main toolings used for observation and monitoring. And it's just basically checking over your systems, your servers and your load balancers. So if there's kind of like a tweak in the system, you can kind of log in and check that. Also, Prometheus has the ability to kind of create, I think it's stories, if I'm to be corrected. I'm not too much on the Prometheus types or metric types. And with those metric types, you can basically scale different levels or create different levels of alerting capabilities. So, for instance, it's very similar to me from using something as New Relic, where you can kind of set up different levels of metrics to alert you when something goes wrong according to how your service is scaled. So if you can set it to, if something is down in 10 minutes, switch over to the blue server, X, Y, and Z, and you just kind of have the ability to do that. And then it kind of leads, like I said, to my favorite things, producing service reports. When kind of being somebody who's within the DevOps world, it's not just about deploying it or migrating it to your clients and leaving them alone. I like to also build a relationship and kind of say, hey, not only have we deployed this, not only are we looking after the environment, here's a service report just to see how it was doing. And I think looking at metrics can also allow you to see, hey, we actually don't need this amount of servers. Maybe we can kind of use that money and pull it towards something else. Hey, you're actually working in a multi-regional zone. Maybe we should kind of look at the offerings for AWS. Hey, do you know what? We could just do different things. So that's kind of like I would describe Prometheus, having the ability to create metric types, pre-configured kind of like dashboards, and most importantly, automate and improve different levels of alerting capabilities.
So piggyback question onto that. So, understanding the tool piece of that, but also security. So there's a question from Yogesh, which is a question after my own heart, is security can't be an afterthought. So how do you see security being taken into account as needed?
Oh, that's my favorite question, I think. Right. So hence why the dark side of DevOps. This is why I called it the dark side of DevOps, because this is the issue. Many times people are so focused on automation that security is an afterthought. Hence why we have DevSecOps. Ideally, DevSecOps shouldn't have really been invented because it should have been thought about when you've kind of put it in the DevOps practices. But no, Yogesh is right. Security can't be an afterthought. So instead of kind of going to DevOps culture, I would just go straight in and just say, hey, let's implement something that is DevSecOps. So instead of talking with not only our software engineers, let's also talk with our cybersecurity consultants, our pen testers, to see what we are building. Is it not only scalable, but is it safe to scale? And, is it free from attackers? So that's how I would see it being taken into account, kind of looking at your DevOps model or organization, and also seeing that in the kind of application level or when creating a high level design in accordance to architecture, let's just make sure that we are also putting in the security measures so we don't have to waste time and do it again. So kind of like starting from the bottom up, essentially, instead of looking at it from the top down.
And so a follow-up question that, for me is, how much security training do you feel like your dev teams or your engineering teams need to go through, or how much security should they know versus the security team advising them?
Oh, I think we wouldn't want to overload DevOps engineers too much, because already it feels like we're wearing 5 hats. I think DevOps engineers ideally should understand and know the importance of security measures. They should know the tooling that is used, and they should mostly be taught what to do in the case of a security incident. But I think, depending on the level of the security incidents, we shouldn't kind of outcast the need for cybersecurity people. They still need to be there, but it's more so of not saying that DevOps engineers should now also take on the role of a cybersecurity person, but just saying, in the event of a security incident, depending on the level. So yet again, going back to the concept of P1 to P5, you can fix it on this level or triage it on. So just knowing when to triage onto the appropriate teams.
How would you approach an environment like, it's great if your organization is fully in one of the 5 cloud providers and everything's all there. But what if it's not? What if you have some on-prem environments, some, colo data centers, some sort of legacy technology living in certain places of the organization? How do you build a DevSecOps strategy around that?
It's very difficult. And from from my personal and experience, especially working with quite a lot of governments and banks and using legacy systems, there is always the hardest thing about transforming or transitioning from monolith to microservices isn't actually the idea of how to do it. There's many toolings on the market that allows you to migrate across to that. It will be slower than if you're already in a microservice environment, but it is possible. If anything, it's probably convincing the senior stakeholders that are very just stuck in their ways using legacy systems of the actual benefits of kind of like going to something that's just a bit more automated. A lot of people that work in legacy environments are kind of like, if it's broken, don't fix it. But apart from, moving on with the times, it's moving on with the times and also increasing your security measures. So when kind of dealing with senior stakeholders or people that work in monolith environments or legacy applications, I go straight to security. And I think when you tell senior stakeholders, banks, hedge funds, governments, or any organization that, hey, monolith is there, microservices is the way forward, let's talk about DevSecOps and create a high level design of your current organization, pinpoint out different levels of vulnerabilities. I think that's just basically a winner.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that in broad strokes, that's definitely how you win. It's not always so easy to win that argument, though. Some of these legacy applications, it's
crazy.
They work, and it's sometimes it's a little hard to see the ROI to spend the cost to go to microservices, even with all of the sell around security and automation. It can be a very, very challenging discussion. And I've seen, certain approaches where you could maybe like lift and shift legacy applications into the cloud and sort of manage them in the cloud and not refactor them into something. And that's sort of like a hybrid-y kind of approach. It's just, sometimes it could be a little hard culturally when you have like half of your stack being like the cool new thing and the other half being like the old thing. And you sort of have to like culturally bridge that like, wait, cool new kids, old, So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
And I would bet like a lot of organizations, that aren't new are faced with that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to put in my charger. I think it's falling out.
Yeah, Nikki, to your point, I think it's also a mindset shift of, how you do business. And then, thinking about the old school people who have been supporting these legacy technologies and how do you bring them up to speed to newer technologies and microservices, and what does that mean for them? So,
and some of them could be really proprietary, and that is very expensive, to redo and refactor. And, it's these are not easy conversations to have with senior stakeholders. And it's not because they don't think it's a good idea to make something better and newer and faster. It's just that you're in a business setting. Is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze there? Yeah. And so it can be challenging. But you can also win, I think, with building out like a DevSecOps culture around both the new and the old. I mean, I've had some success here, and just like highlighting like, why this legacy app needs to live here and why it's still going to live in its current form versus the new stuff that is more suited to, a cloud native deployment stack.
Yeah. What's the big picture? What's your North Star? What you're trying to get to?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe this legacy app is going to die in 5 years and we're just going to have to maintain for 5 years, and it's just not worth the X amount of dollars to fix it right now, or to, competency controls, risk management, all of those good old fashioned security tools here.
Yes. Hi again.
I'm just looking in the chat here. Let's see.
So there is one. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No, go ahead, Shanisa. I was just kind of picking out. You pick one.
Yeah, there was a question from Yogesh about how do we challenge the claim from development teams that all my apps are internal facing, so why do you need DevSecOps and code scanning tools? So basically, if there's nothing that's external facing, is there really a need for DevSecOps or scanning?
Why do you change this from all my apps are internal facing? Why do you need it? I would say DevSecOps is still probably needed, especially in regards to scanning tools, because as a human, you can't do anything. So it's definitely influencing and taking advantage of the automation that the concept of scanning tools kind of provide. It's just basically why I like the concept of DevOps, or even using code scanning tools, is having the ability to protect in the background. When it comes to tech and coding, you never know what's going on in the background. So I would always kind of like implement code scanning tools or DevSecOps practices either way.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that, is that if you're not doing scanning, then how do you know they're all internal facing? How do you know something's not been exposed? So
yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah. Another question in the chat: which component is more vulnerable as per your view and experience? Is it CI/CD pipelines, source code, Kubernetes, Docker, or anything else?
I would say probably it's probably a switch between source code and Kubernetes pods. I probably would say Kubernetes pods, it can be a bit of a mare, especially depending on how many nodes you kind of create a day, that can be quite slow in the background as well. So probably using it alongside something like an S3 bucket can be a bit more facilitating. Source code can be vulnerable as well, depending if you don't have a GitHub repository or GitOps model in place. Docker, depending again on how many images you're storing. I use a great tool, something called Harbor UI, that can help facilitate with that as well.
Cool. Some more questions. There's a comment which I think is pretty good. What I've seen work well is train devs on the OWASP top 10. I think this is for our legacy questions that we had.
Okay, sure.
Security team becomes a consulting role, frees time for analysis and fix recommendations, and dev teams implement the fixes. Yeah, that's a cool. Good cycle of fixing.
Yeah, that's really smart. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the end of those questions, but another question from me is, we're talking about the dark side of DevSecOps. What other dark side patterns or that have you observed? Can you comment on, or bad things or gotchas in the DevSecOps journey? Like what have you seen that has been like not the right outcome?
I think the main thing would be going back to when integrating DevOps, it's probably just looking at the organization and necessarily flipping it on its head in looking in regards to organization, and also creating like high level designs. The dark side of DevOps is the fact that people do not think about implementing security measures into their practices ultimately until it's too late. You've got, wasted money, wasted time, and you've just got too many teams, or the opposite, too many DevOps engineers wearing about 10 hats when there's not the need to. And I think that's what I would refer to the dark side, just not looking at, security, and just kind of being very excited about automation, which essentially gives hackers and other kind of bad actors per se the opportunity to make your environment a bit more vulnerable. So I say, even though DevOps is a great culture to adhere to, if we don't think about DevSecOps, it can be very vulnerable. Automation is great, but it's vulnerable because we're totally relying on automation and not really understanding or giving room for human error. Another dark side of DevSecOps, I would say, is probably the man time that it could have implementing it. I think, like I said many times, working in DevOps, you wear many hats. But then if we now go on to DevSecOps, what exactly is DevSecOps? Should we not just kind of push away DevSecOps and just call it DevOps, because integrating security practices should not, to somewhat, be a no-brainer? And if we now kind of go into DevSecOps, how far do we go with DevSecOps, and how closely does it integrate with cybersecurity engineers or application engineers and pen testers? Would we need the need for a DevSecOps engineer and a cybersecurity engineer? I think, there's always ways within the DevOps money to save money, but I think, unfortunately, you're either saving money on application, or you're saving money on people. And I think that's where morally things can kind of, get a bit tricky.
And what do you say to those people who say that security slows down the DevOps process?
I would rather have a slow down and safe process rather than have a fast and efficient process that has lots of holes and has, vulnerability written all over it. I think it's not necessarily, when it comes to security, slowing down the DevOps process, especially if you are an, managed service provider, or if you are just a company, you probably would be able to keep your technical integrity if you design a system that is vulnerability robust or technically security robust, rather than rushing the migration process but not having anything security-wise in sight. And I think in order to counteract that, it's probably maybe AWS, Oracle, and Azure looking at other offerings that would be able to implement that within their service. So I know that there's something new to me called Jenkins IO, and not only is it more automated, I think it provides a visible audit of what kind of deployments or integrations that are kind of like going on.
Yep, there is. I'm just scrolling through the chat here. What would you say are the key elements that a team should use to avoid the dark side of sec and DevSecOps? For example, building trust with teams that don't trust security tools.
What would I say? I would say, what are the key elements that a team should use to avoid the dark side of DevOps? Build trust with teams that don't use DevSecOps. Oh, that's quite a good question. Key elements, I would say concepts. So why do we need kind of like DevSecOps? You don't necessarily need to have to technically negate away from that, but I think it's building trust with the teams. So speaking and sitting down with the vulnerability or pen testing teams and the cybersecurity teams, just really just looking at your whole kind of like DevOps kind of culture and saying, well, we're all going towards the same kind of mantra. How do we kind of work to coincide together without stepping on kind of like each other's toes? And I think another thing that can kind of one of the key elements that can kind of use to avoid the dark side of DevOps, whatever, or DevSecOps, is looking at stuff like GDPR, or ISO 27001. ISO 27001 can be used alongside AWS Identity Access Management, because in essence, you have to kind of make sure that you have the right organizational units and security to protect that. Whereas if you're talking about GDPR, it's more in regards to data management. So that can easily kind of like be coincided together.
Yeah, I would just want to add to that really quick. So I think, like you said, Yasmin, there's building that partnership. And, to the question, there may not be a lot of trust there because sometimes security tools can be chatty, with false positives and things that have other, mitigating controls. And so building that relationship between the teams, I think is going to be important.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just scrolling through here, looking. Moving multiple products and engineering teams to a DevOps CI/CD can be challenging for governance and getting the teams to have coherency. How do you deal with the challenges of a larger security model, I guess?
Oh gosh, that's something that happens, funnily enough, a lot so in government applications, especially when using legacy. But I think when it comes to moving multiple projects and engineering teams, that's when I would probably then start to advocate or look for using multi-cloud or hybrid cloud models. So even though every cloud has different level of offerings, a lot of clients that I work with will maybe use Azure with AWS, hence why Active Directory Azure with Identity Access Management Azure. And I think that kind of enhances different levels of governance, and especially can facilitate for larger challenges of security in organizations, especially when working in a multi-region. So that's kind of like the level or the process that I would kind of follow that too.
Cool. Well, I think we got through most of our questions here.
Great, so that was so fun.
Yeah. So I guess, Yasmin, over to you. Is there any sort of final thoughts, links, items you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I've added a link to my Medium profile where I've written a step-by-step guide of how I got into DevOps and the toolings that you should use to prepare yourself for your first interview, with interview questions that are primarily asked. And I've also added another Medium article about Battle in the Sky, just in case you want a bit more background information to what different cloud providers there are and what kind of offerings that they provide. Alongside of that, I've also provided a platform. So I've started a company called Orchid Cloud, which is encouraging minorities or people just to get into tech. And, this can be mums that have left the workforce or want to get into tech. This could be people of the LGBTQ community and Black, White, Asian, anybody that kind of feels disadvantaged of getting yourself into tech. So if you click the link to that form, fill it out with your name, what kind of tech you want to be into, and go through then I then obviously link you to a number of internships, apprenticeships, and study groups and kind of join to.
That's really cool. I just dropped all those links into the YouTube chat.
Great, thank you.
So cool. All right, Shanisa, any final thoughts?
No, just thank you, Yasmin. This was really insightful. I think I agree with you that DevOps is a culture. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this was really great. Cool. Well, I think look out for our meetup for our next episode. I don't think we have all the content just yet. Just watch out to the meetup page. We'll post it soon. Sorry about that. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys all very much. And thanks for joining. And thank you, Yasmin. And thank you, Shanisa. And thanks, Nancy. See you all soon.
See you.